Yeah, what I've always said is if you're good enough, you're old enough. And if a guy's good enough, we want to try to figure out a way to create a role for him, right? It doesn't matter if you're a freshman, a sophomore, a senior. Ultimately, we want guys that can play winning football.
Hello and welcome. It's always college football. Today is Thursday, June the 12th. And we appreciate you being here from wherever it is you're coming to us from, whether it's the ESPN College Football YouTube page. We appreciate you being here. Go ahead and subscribe to the ESPN College Football YouTube page. You'll get tons of great content every single day. They're churning out videos all the time, highlight videos, all kinds of fun stuff. And those of you that are here with us via the podcast, subscribe to the podcast. Cannot ask you that enough. We see all the downloads and we want to make sure the subscriptions are up so that you automatically get those episodes populating your inbox when we put them out. So check those out. Make sure you're subscribed. If you're not, go ahead and do it. And while you're there, leave a rating, leave a review, whatever you choose. We really appreciate you being here. The summer months are fun because we really get to have great conversations with coaches and we get to kind of dive into their programs when at this point, there's still so much new. There's still much to figure out. Today, we will do that with the Oregon Ducks. Dan Lanning will join the show. I always love visiting with him. He's one of my favorite coaches. There have been two coaches that I remember sitting in a coaches meeting with thinking, all right, they're going to be big time when they get their opportunity to run a program. Dan Lanning was one. The other was Marcus Freeman. Both have gone on now to do amazing things. We visited with Marcus a couple weeks ago, and now we'll have the chance to lead the talk to the man that's currently leading the Oregon Ducks into year number 2 in the Big Ten. There was so much unknown last year. There were so many holes to fill off the previous year, and they just went on to win the Big Ten in their first year, undefeated in the process, and they came up a little short there in the Rose Bowl, but so much more to look forward to this upcoming year. We'll talk about his roster. We'll talk about his son, who might have just captured a championship in flag football, and we'll talk about who he's currently getting advice from, because he's still a young coach and still learning on the job, but he's done a remarkably good job up to this point, that's for sure. After that, we'll play the game that we like to play every once in a while. Like it, love it, not so fast, my friend. So Kubiak will give us a list of topics, a bunch of questions. We'll tell you if we like it, we'll tell you if we love it, or we'll tell you not so fast, my friends. So let's dive in. We'll kick things off with the head coach of the Oregon Ducks. It's Dan Lanning. He's the head coach of the Oregon Ducks, and we're so glad to have him with us. He's one of the best in college football and hasn't been doing it that long. But, Coach, now here entering into another year of Duck football, you got to be excited about the momentum created last year. How do you carry over some of that momentum off the Big Ten title?
Yeah, I think it starts with, some of the standards that our players have set, and they start to develop ownership of what's kind of happened here in the past. I mean, you remember being part of great teams, and all of a sudden it's like, no, this is how we do it. This is what we do. And our players are really carrying on that mantra heading into this next season with also realizing that last season has nothing to do with the next one, which makes it fun.
It's got to be especially fun knowing that you can have the success that you have one year, replace some key pieces, to lose a first-round pick and replace him with an equally talented college-level quarterback in Dylan Gabriel is pretty remarkable. It's nice to know you have those resources behind you, but it's got to be almost difficult because, while, yes, it's nice to have deep pockets and things, it's also a challenge to figure out, all right, who do we want? So what's that process like when you can go and kind of go after anybody, and yet you got to choose the right guy for your program?
Well, I think it's always about picking the right person, right? It's always about picking the right people, and you want competitive guys with competitive spirit, guys that are great players, guys that are committed to trying to be the best version of themselves. And a lot of people mess up in evaluation. For us, we try to start with people. What kind of people are you bringing aboard? And that's all. That will always be our process. Guys that want to get better, growth mindset, that have the talent that can play at this level.
When you look at the first year in the Big Ten, there was so much unknown. Last year, we're sitting there saying, how's it going to go? Is it going to be athleticism? Is it going to be line of scrimmage? Is it going to be ball control? Like, none of us knew. I would think you as coaches might not have even known in some cases. But looking back at kind of how last year went, would you say it kind of went the way you expected with the way the Big Ten performed in those big opportunities?
I think it's a great conference, and I've always talked about what winning football looks like. In my time, regardless of where you're at some point winning football has to show up, and this conference has a lot of winning football in it, right? And yeah, you want to be athletic, you want to play the game with a certain level of speed, but it takes a physicality, and I think that's a piece that our team established here is, hey, you got to be able to go bang heads at times to be able to play at the highest level.
Well, you guys have always been everywhere you've been, whether it was prior to at Georgia, your time obviously early in your Oregon now run. It's kind of wild how just physical your team is. It's almost like I know what to expect. It's like the West Coast Georgia. Like when I turn on Oregon, I know what I'm getting. It's great line of scrimmage play. It's sound football. It's smart football. And it's tremendous athleticism on the outside. So with that blueprint in mind, do you feel like you've been able to adequately replace some of those pieces that were lost off last year's team?
Yeah, I think that goes with the development of this team, right? I feel really good about the players we have on this team. What they lack is experience. So this season will be a great opportunity for those guys that we've recruited here to go in and be able to make an impact. And how quickly can you get that experience? And as you know, there's nothing like game day experience in comparison to practice. It's just not the same. So us getting those guys acclimated quickly and putting them in position to be able to go make plays is going to be huge.
I don't think there's anybody in the country, coach, that does a better job than y'all on the defensive side in particular, rolling guys. It's like I feel like my depth chart when I do an Oregon game or watch an Oregon game, there's like 40 guys on defense that might be in meaningful situations. And that's unique. We don't see that across the board. You must really trust your depth. In an era where depth is kind of in question for just about everybody, how have you been able to create such depth at so many positions to the point where you're comfortable rolling guys the way you do on defense?
Yeah, what I've always said is if you're good enough, you're old enough. And if a guy's good enough, we want to try to figure out a way to create a role for him, right? It doesn't matter if you're a freshman, a sophomore, a senior. Ultimately, we want guys that can play winning football. And if you can play winning football for us, we want to try to create a role for you. We want to make sure that you can be involved in what we're doing. And now the key of that is having guys that embrace their role, whatever they can do for the team, wanting to be the best version of themselves doing that.
Look, back in the day, it was always about recruiting. Hey, how early can I play, coach? Like, how quickly can you get me on the field? I know that might not necessarily be the number one reason why a guy might go somewhere nowadays, but I would imagine it's still a really high priority for a lot of the guys. So with the recruits that are rolling in here throughout the summer, how many are really curious about what the depth chart looks like and what their pathway to playing time is?
Yeah, I think every single one of them. That hasn't changed in the last 20 years, right? Guys want to go places where they can have the opportunity to compete. And I think that's the piece is, do you have belief in yourself? If you truly believe that you're one of the best in the nation, you will have the opportunity here to compete for role. And when you compete for that role, do you earn it, right? So nothing's handed out. It starts fresh every single year. But you guys that want to really, truly be great, they want to be able to play. They want to be in a place where they know they're going to get that opportunity, but they don't mind competition along the way because that's going to create the best version of them.
Yeah, I would think competition, that's kind of what you want. And if you're going to Oregon, like, you're competing. Guess what? Like, you get a free pass to Oregon to start, like, you must be a dude. But either way, I do want to talk a little bit about your personnel, your quarterback situation in particular. I love what Coach Stein does from an offensive standpoint. He puts so much in the quarterback's lap, but he also makes it so digestible for the quarterback. You now have a young guy coming in Dante Moore. He's got all the talent in the world, and he's now competing for that job. I know it's not his officially just yet, but what do you want to see from him throughout fall camp to kind of give him the freedom that you gave to Dylan last year and Bo the year before?
Yeah, I think what's really critical is they have to be themselves, right? But we got to figure out what they can handle, and whether it's Dante or Austin or Luke or whoever's out there for us at quarterback, each one of them is going to be a little bit different, but we have to do things, so frequently and so often in practice that they become second nature to our players in games. And I don't want to ever be asking them to do something on game day that they haven't already replicated in summer and spring and practice in the fall. We want them to do stuff that's routine. And when you have great players, they'll make routine plays look like elite plays because they executed at such a high level. Ultimately, we've been really successful protecting the ball the last few years. And I think that's really important when you have playmakers, find opportunities to get the ball to playmakers and then make great decisions. And if you do that at quarterback in our system, you're going to be elite.
How do you balance that message, though, to a young guy that maybe is trying to go win the job? I mean, naturally, they want to go out, they want to win the job, they want to secure the job, they want the team to follow them, all those things. And in doing so, maybe they're trying things that they shouldn't. Maybe they're forcing the issue, trying to make a play, and it results in a mistake. How do you balance that message to a guy that, hey, yeah, we know that you want to do this, but hey, let's make the routine play first? How do you handle that as a coach?
Well, you point it out when it happens. You highlight it. When guys do a great job of taking one in the progression and it's there and they take advantage of it, you make sure you point that out and you highlight the good. But it's no different than a golf swing. We go out here to the course and we're like, hey, let's hit this driver as far as we can. We know it's going to go right or left, right? You've got to be able to do routine and do it smooth. And at times you got to be creative with your feet and you got to be able to make plays on the move. But that doesn't mean that you can't be making plays on the move and still be a great decision maker and make great decisions for your team. So we highlight when guys, take easy money and they take advantage of what's in front of them. And then we highlight when guys make sure they protect the ball and don't put it in jeopardy.
I know with the departure of a couple guys up front, I know there's been a huge emphasis on trying to reestablish that identity along the offensive line with the young quarterback too, regardless of who it is. That group's going to have to play at a high level to kind of take the burden off the new quarterback. So how is the competition going along the offensive line, and how do you see it kind of playing out in fall camp?
Yeah, it's extremely competitive right now. The guys have worked really hard. What I love about our offensive line here is they work really well together. Like on the teams you've been on, I'm sure it's very similar. The O-line group is always a really tight-knit group, and we have a group that's really, a tight-knit group. Last year we had a lot of transition on that offensive line, and we were Joe Moore Award finalists. Last year we were Joe Moore Award finalists. The year before, we've done a really good job of protecting the quarterback. So again, there's been some standards that have been established with that group. They expect to have a 1,000-yard rusher. They expect to have a quarterback that throws for a lot of yards and be in contention for a Heisman at the end of the year. They take a lot of pride in that. And they've been working really hard this offseason, but there's still a lot of work to do before we get to game one.
Well, you mentioned the 1,000-yard rusher, and I put my list together, my top running backs in college football. I think Mekhi Hughes is just ridiculous. I love this guy. I think he's so great. I think he's going to be awesome in y'all's system. What was it about his skill set that made you think, all right, this is the guy. This is the one we got to go get, and we got to land him because we're going to create a pretty dynamic 1-2 punch at running back?
Yeah, ultimately, goal for us is, again, to make sure we have enough guys that can play a winning level of football. And there's kind of a number that we really want in that running back room, and felt like we had an opportunity to go get a good player in Mekhi. And then have some really talented players in that room as well that I'm really excited about. Some young ones that just came in, and Jordan and Dier, and then some guys that have been here, Noah's been a proven back for us in our league. Dink Riggs had a really good season his freshman year. Jay Harris, Jay Lamar. There's several guys I think in that room that can make an impact. But we're ultimately looking for guys that fit us, right? And the one piece about Mekhi is he's the guy that's always falling forward. When there's yards to be had, he's going to make sure that he's falling forward.
He runs hard, man. And I know, look, I don't know how often y'all have gone live in the spring, maybe twice, I would imagine, in scrimmages. But I would think that when you get done playing against him, the defenders are like, yeah, that guy's a handful. Is that the reaction that you had from your defense?
Yeah, he's a heavy load. Him and several of our backs, they do a good job on those live days of making sure that they run through contact. And I would say we have a couple seekers of contact in that room.
I think that's a great way of describing what those guys try to attack with. Look, we were listening prior to the interview. There was music that was just absolutely blasting, and Kubiak, our producer, was like, "Is this room next to the weight room?" And he goes, "No, that's next to the locker room." And I mean, the camera was almost shaking. It was going so loud. You've created a really awesome culture, Coach, where it's, hey, we're going to be accountable, we're going to be physical, but we're going to have fun. And I feel like that's a hard thing to kind of nail, to kind of walk that fine line, to be a player's coach, but to demand the most of them when they're out there on the practice field. How have you found a way to balance it?
Yeah, for me, it's being really clear with your expectations and don't be wish-washy, right? You can't say, I'm going to be a player's coach this day and then the next day bring the hammer down. Like, what expectations we set for our team, our guys know what they mean, and it's really important to them. When it's business time, they understand what that looks like. And when it's time for us to have some fun, we do that as well. But for me, it's about being a good communicator to our team of what the expectation is in every situation, and dictating that expectation, not necessarily just riding by the seat of our pants.
Well, help me understand how loud it is in the locker room after a win. Because if it's anything like what I just heard, I would imagine it's almost deafening. Is that a fair evaluation?
We have a lot of fun in the locker room. And we'll always be a team that celebrates wins in that locker room afterwards.
I love it. One thing that I know you also have been celebrating, your son, if I'm not mistaken, won a flag football championship this past week. Is that kind of a sign of things to come here in the Lanning family?
It's a sign of growth, right? They got a good team. They're really well coached. I enjoy going and watching them play and getting to be a dad and just sit on the sideline. But it was fun to see him go out there and compete with his friends.
I would imagine. Are there any of the coaches kind of like, "Hey, coach, what do you think about like this? What if I cloud this side of the field? Like, you good with that? Like, anything that they're trying to maybe bounce off you as far as game planning is concerned?"
No, man, that their job's the coach. I remember early on going to he plays tackle football in the fall. And I
Yeah.
remember really early in one of the practices, I stood up and I was about to go on the field and start to address some things. I'm like, this is how we should be doing it. And then I said, take a step back. That's their job. If there's something that's really important to communicate it. But sit down and be a dad. Watch the game, enjoy it. And if they have a question, certainly I'll answer it. But I think they know that I enjoy just going out there and getting to see him do his thing.
Well, it's cool to see someone having the success that you're having and balancing the work life and the family life. I think there's some value to that and just keeping perspective. I suppose like the days of hey, you're gonna get to the office at 4 a.m. and leave at 3 a.m. to me are kind of archaic, and I think it will grind people to a halt. So, seeing kind of where the coaching profession is heading as far as work life balance. How do you think we'll continue to work in that direction to where you can, be around and be available to your kids and to your family while still putting forth an incredible product on the field?
Yeah, I don't think there'll ever be a balance. That's just not the reality. To be great in this profession, you have to work extremely hard. It takes a lot of time, but I do think you can be intentional. So we were having exit interviews from our official visits this past weekend, and even our recruits' parents knew that I had a flag football game that I was going to try to go watch at 1:30, regardless. And so sitting in that last exit interview, one of the moms asked me that question, when's your son's game? I said 1:30. She goes, okay, we're not going to go longer than that. I promise. So it's great when they're on the same page as you of what you want to be able to accomplish. But will there ever be balance? No, there won't. But at some point in life, there'll be time for that balance down the road.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. You recently talked to Coach Saban. I know you guys met and had some conversations. And look, I know he's been a mentor to you in some ways. Many years ago, you were on his staff. So, what kind of advice do you get from him? What do you bounce off of him to maybe put into your program so that you can kind of keep in touch with the guy that had clearly had remarkable success?
Yeah, I just always felt like he's almost got a rubric of how you handle every situation and how you handle this, how you develop this. And the one thing I always learned from Coach is how consistent he was in everything he did. And on Tuesday, I'm going to meet with this player group at this time, and I would say that's not necessarily me, right? We're similar in the sense that there's things that we want to do consistently, but it's always good to take a back seat, pick his brain a little bit on, hey, how was I developing leadership in young guys? Here's the three things that I did, Dan, and kind of walk me through that. So I'm always going to lean on the best to ever do it, right? When it comes to situations like that.
Can you expect there to be great leadership on teams on an annual basis when there's so much turnover? Because I feel like that's one thing that I've always been curious about. I would ask Coach Saban himself, but I'm curious if since you just asked him about it, how do you cultivate leadership now that it's kind of so transactional the way it's become these last few years?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of a farce. Like, there's truth to that there's transactional to it, but players still want to be great. The product on the field is still really elite. They just want to be pushed, and you have to find a way to push them. And I think that goes back to being open and honest. One thing that I've kind of learned in the last 3 years is don't put an age on leadership.
Yeah.
Right? So many teams that we've been a part of, you've said, okay, well, they're seniors now. It's their turn to be leaders. Like, why not let a freshman come in and lead if he's ready to lead? So to me, it's about how do you cultivate that? How do you develop that? And for us, it's a lot of training. It's a lot of leadership training. It's about what's this need to look like for us to be successful. So I've put a bigger emphasis in our program now on cultivating and developing leadership at a younger age. And then throughout the season, it's going to be a constant topic for us, and pointing out when it looks great, and then making guys realize they're going to make some mistakes in the process too. And the other piece of leadership is there's a book called Captain's Class that's really good, and it talks about the variety of leaders, right? And what kind of leaders are out there. You still have to be genuinely you. right? As you lead, right? You don't have to be the guy that's always talking in front of the team. It can be the small message you pull a guy to the side, that small message you give in his ear that can be the difference. So those are the things that we try to identify in our program and make sure that our players have the opportunity to take advantage of.
Coach, we'll get you out of here with this, and I think that's great perspective, because I remember sometimes be like, and this is a little bit old school, right? Like the freshmen come in, start chirping, like, dude, you haven't played. But then again, like
Right.
you're week one, and the guy's making plays all over the field. It's like, maybe he had a point. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
even as a fifth
Well,
year,
one of our older players brought that up to me the other day. Like, Coach, why is this guy talking? He hasn't done anything yet. I said, you don't want him to develop as a leader. You think that's bad for our team that he's wanting to be involved and speaking up? And I think that just gave a little bit different perspective to a veteran on our team of, hey, you know what, you're right. Like if the message is right, why does it matter how old he is, right?
No,
and then, hey, knowing in the same note that freshman's going to go on and make a couple mistakes, and that's okay.
yeah, no, I think it's great. I mean, it's just, you don't hear it very often where you're empowering the young guys,
Right.
as opposed to, hey, rookie, be quiet, talk next year. It's nice to know that, hey, if they want to develop their voice, they can certainly find it in your program. Coach, you're one of the best in the country at what you do. What you've accomplished already is remarkable. Last year was truly remarkable. I know it didn't finish the way you wanted it to finish, but I remember in 2008 coming up just one game short of the ultimate goal. This year, in many ways, you came up one game short of the ultimate goal. Have you noticed a difference amongst your program with maybe just going a little bit harder, maybe a little bit longer, a little more time in the classroom from your players to kind of just know that they were this close last year and just a little bit more might be able to get them over the hump? Have you sensed any of that?
I think it's early. It's still early to know exactly what this team will look like. I'm excited to see what it is. I do think we have unbelievable buy-in right now. And I do think we have guys that are working extremely hard, and they realize, how minuscule the difference might be in success and failure on the football field. So they take it really serious. But this is a new team. It is a new team. It's different people. There's some guys on our team that are going to make an impact that weren't part of that team last year. So continue to evaluate, see where we're at when we get to game one.
Well, Coach, it's been a blast to cover your team the last couple of years. You guys do an incredible job just bringing the best out of the players. It's been fun to watch. I know it'll happen again this year. I wish you the best of luck. Great summer, healthy fall, and we look forward to seeing you during the season.
Greg, appreciate it, man. Thanks for having us on.
Great visit there with Coach Dan Lanning. I think he's going to do an amazing job this year, which is why we will probably kick off this segment with an Oregon-related content. We're going to go with a game that we've played a bunch of times in the past. It's always a lot of fun. Like it, love it, or not so fast, my friend. Coobs, let's kick things off.
Right, we have to start with Oregon, right? So like it, love it, or not so fast, my friend, that Oregon will win their first national championship.
Love it. I mean, I think that last year's team learned a lot, and it was somewhat circumstantial, right? They beat the inevitable national champions in the regular season. They run into a bit of a buzzsaw off the bye week, and it just didn't work out there in the Rose Bowl. They got off to a slow start. They can never climb their way out of that hill. But if you look at what's needed now to win a national championship, all right, you have to have, I think, an elite coaching staff. I believe they have that. I think Dan Lanning is elite. I think Will Stein is elite. I think Tosh Lupoy on defense is elite. I think if you look at just their coaches across the board, they are really good and have had great success at the college level, not just at Oregon, but at several other places as well. They can all recruit, and they've done a great job of evaluating, developing talent. Secondly, I think you absolutely have to be able to identify quarterback potential, right? They've done so the last couple of years. Bo Nix was, of course, a great player for them a couple of years ago, parlayed that into becoming a first-round pick. Dillon Gabriel was a highly successful, extremely successful college quarterback at multiple stops, gets his last shot there at Oregon, and didn't skip a beat from what Bo Nix did the year before. You look at this year, it's a little bit more of a question mark. I think Dante Moore is ultimately going to be the guy. He's been remarkably highly touted, though. They have, I think, a couple years now where he's been learning in the system, been watching, been trying to figure it out. Last year, learned right there with Dillon Gabriel. They arrived at a similar time, so he went through that process of installing the offense and learning the offense and seeing it run at a ridiculously high level. I think Will Stein, though, they're going to give the quarterback a lot of freedom, but their quarterback is usually going to be put into situations that are really comfortable. That's what Will Stein, I think, excels at. He makes it seem super complicated for the opposing defense, but for the quarterback, it's pretty simple. Pitch and catch, simple reads, great screen game, creativity. And I think with the addition of Mekhi Hughes, I think they're going to be able to adequately run the football to take some of the pressure off their young starting quarterback. So I look at that. I think the line of scrimmage, offensive line, yeah, there's new pieces. Sure, there was new pieces last year. They didn't miss a beat last year as they moved from 23 to 24. I look at the defensive line. Yeah, there were a couple guys lost, but some of their most productive pieces are back. And then I look at their weapons. They have great weapons as well. So I think they check every possible box that you could possibly ask for when potentially considering possibilities for national championship run. I think playing in the Big Ten is going to prepare them. I think their schedule is, for the most part, relatively favorable. It's not easy, but it's favorable. They avoid Ohio State. They avoid Michigan. They do have to go to Penn State, which would be a great test for them. But I love the Ducks heading into this year. But then again, every year with what Dan Lanning's created, I think I'm always going to love the Ducks.
All right, that's fair. We're going to stay in the Big Ten here. Like it, love it, or not so fast, my friend. The Big Ten has the best group of quarterbacks heading into the season.
Not so fast, my friend. Now, I like the potential at a few places for sure, right? We're kind of hinging our expectations on the potential of a handful of guys, like Dante Moore at Oregon. Obviously, really highly regarded, highly touted player, but you don't know for sure until they run out there and take the first snap. Until they're playing in a meaningful game and they're down 7 on the road in a hostile environment. You don't really know what you have until the guy goes out there and passes that test. The same can be said with Julian Saban, assuming he gets the job at Ohio State. I think he's probably the guy to beat. Really highly touted guy, clearly incredible skill set, great potential, but we don't know just yet. Now, great supporting cast as well. That helps a lot with Dante Moore and with Julian Saban. And then you look at what we have at Michigan with Bryce Underwood, and am I optimistic that he could be this year's version of DJ Alagway? Sure. He could, as a true freshman, go right out there and do some amazing things. And if you look at where Michigan's quarterback play was a year ago, they're going to improve by leaps and bounds at that position. They almost have to. No disrespect to the guys that were already there. I look at some of the other pieces, though, and there are some guys I really like in the league. I like Drew Aller an awful lot. I think he's a top 5-6 quarterback in all of college football, especially with what returns and just entering into year number 3 as a starting quarterback. I think the sky's the limit for what he could accomplish this year. I look at Luke Altmaier at Illinois, a guy that's kind of under the radar a little bit underrated, I think nationally, but does a great job within that offense. I look at what you might have at Indiana. I look at what you might have at a few other places. I look at what you might have at Washington. At the end of the season, we might feel real good about the Big Ten starting quarterbacks, but I can't at this point tell you that without a shadow of a doubt, it's the best group collectively. Now, it kind of depends a little bit on what your assessment is. Are we going based on what they've done at the college level so far? Or are we going based on upside? Because I gave you the 3 big names that could really alter the perception of the quarterback position in the Big Ten. That's Dante Moore, Julian Saban, and Bryce Underwood. Those 3 guys all knock it out of the park. Completely different conversation. But at this point, there's a few more known commodities in other places. Right now, you can make a pretty strong argument on behalf of the Big 12. As crazy as that may sound, with Sam Leavitt back at Arizona State, a guy that I think is incredible. The possibility of Sawyer Robertson at Baylor continuing on with what he accomplished last year, carrying over the back half of the season, looking at just how good he was down the stretch, and assuming that he might be able to take the next step. You look at Josh Hoover at TCU, quietly put together ridiculous numbers throughout all of last season. The guy threw for a ton of yards, and no one seemingly paid attention to what he was able to accomplish. Rocco Beck is back at Iowa State, who just grinds it out and finds a way to win. Now, we'll have some new faces on the perimeter, but I'm pretty optimistic about his play, and I know kind of what I'm going to get from him on a week-in, week-out basis. And then Baron Morton at Texas Tech, a guy that's been injured from time to time, but does ultimately, if he could stay healthy, does ultimately have a lot of experience and does have a lot of talent. And then we didn't even mention what Avery Johnson might be in year number 2 at Kansas State, a guy that was really, really highly talked about last year And maybe last year was a little bit more up and down than we anticipated, but still, you got to be optimistic about him being a little steadier and maybe leaning more into that upside here in 2025. If we're looking at the other Power Fours, I guess if you're looking at the top of the league, the best quarterbacks collectively might be in the ACC, but I don't think the list is quite as long. It'd be Cade Klubnik at Clemson, who I think is as good as anybody in the sport right now. It'd be Carson Beck at Miami, who, assuming he comes back fully from the arm injury that he experienced in the SEC championship game, he's in a great situation heading into this year. And then Kevin Jennings at SMU, who did an amazing job last year. And now in year number 2 as a starter, where he gets all the first team reps in the offseason, that trio might be as good as anybody just based on what they've actually accomplished at the college level when compared amongst their peers. And then finally, we'll go to the SEC, where I think the SEC has kind of a nice mix of guys that have done it at a high level and then guys that we're kind of curious about and have a real high ceiling, but now we just got to go see it. Like I love Garrett Nussmeier. I think Garrett Nussmeier's got a chance to have a big time season. I love John Mateer at Oklahoma. I think those two guys, pound for pound, if you're taking the top 2 in every league, those might be the top 2 in the SEC. But then there are some question marks beyond that. Can DJ Lagway fully recover from an offseason surgery? Can Lenora Sellers continue to live up at South Carolina to what he did last year? I would anticipate growth from him this upcoming season. And then a couple of unknowns. What will we see from Arch Manning, who I love? What will we see from Gunnar Stockton at Georgia, who I think's got a real solid approach to the position and might be kind of that gritty grinder, exactly what Kirby Smart might want from his quarterback there in Athens. And then Ty Simpson at Alabama. Sky's the limit as far as potential, and with the supporting cast, he might have a big year in that offense. But I think there are some unknowns in the SEC, so I have a kind of a tough time putting them collectively across the board. So if I'm going based on just the top, you got to probably go with the top 2 would be to the SEC. The top 3 would probably be to the ACC. The top 5, you probably go to the Big 12. And then the possibility of upside, you probably go to the Big 10.
Well, all right, let's go over to the ACC. Like it, love it, or not so fast, my friend, that Bill Belichick will silence the critics and win 9+ games at North Carolina this year.
Not so fast, my friend. And this is not anything to do with Bill Belichick, has nothing to do with him getting comfortable in the college game, has nothing to do with the ACC or the upside that North Carolina may have. It's the fact that I just have no idea what is a reasonable expectation for the Tar Heels this year. I mean, I look at their schedule, I can go through and think, well, maybe you win there, maybe you win there, maybe you win there, maybe they surprise someone here. I just don't know enough because there's been such turnover from last year to this year. There's so many new faces. There's so many guys that are needing to be replaced and so many guys that have been backfilled in the portal. I think it could be a great year. I think it could be a pretty average year. I really don't know. I think North Carolina, along with a handful of other teams, might be the biggest question mark in the sport. They could win 9, but they could also win 5. I think there's a handful of teams that kind of fall under that umbrella. I could see teams like UCLA getting hot behind Nico Iamaleava, and all of a sudden they're really good, or the wheels could come off and they could be a team that wins 4 games. I look at North Carolina kind of in the same way. I think NC State is a team that kind of falls under that umbrella. They could be really good, or they could kind of come back to earth and maybe look a little more like last year than they did the year before. I think there's a bunch of teams that have big boom, big bust potential. I think North Carolina is one of them. So at this point, I cannot, with any credibility whatsoever, tell you exactly what to expect with North Carolina. There's just far too many unknowns. And that first game against TCU is a real test. Now, TCU is not being talked about a lot in the offseason in a lot of places, but you'll hear about them here because I think last year was the anomaly for Sonny Dykes, where they weren't nearly as bad as their record might have indicated. There were a lot of really positive pieces on last year's team, and they're probably better than what you might have thought if you just look at the Big 12 standings from a year ago. So we're going to find out all we want to know there on Labor Day when the Bill Belichick era officially gets underway.
All right, from Labor Day all the way to the end of the season, the Power Four will have 4 different conference champions this year. Like it, love it, or not so fast, my friend?
I like it. because I look at kind of where the leagues are. We'll start in the Big Ten. Oregon won the league last year. I think they could absolutely repeat. But right now in the preseason, and like I said, in the preseason, early going, I would lean just ever so slightly in favor of Penn State. Now it's close. They also host Oregon. And I look at that game last year and just how closely contested the game was there in the Big Ten championship. I would lean just a little bit towards Penn State at the moment. Now, that's preseason prognostications. There's issues that I have with Penn State's candidacy as a Big Ten champ as well, but I'm not there just yet to go as far as to say, yeah, Penn State, without question, hold me to them, lock it in. Not there yet. But if I had to pick today, they would probably be the front runner in the Big Ten. I look at Ohio State, they got a ton of pieces to replace. I look at Michigan, I mean, they have a lot of pieces that I think could take a big step, especially on the offensive side. I look at USC, a team that lost a bunch of games last year that they had the lead in, they just couldn't hold on. They just got to learn to win. They got to learn to finish. But progress was made on defense, and I'm pretty optimistic about what their offense is always going to be as long as Lincoln Riley's calling the plays. I don't think they're going to win, but I'm telling you, if I'm going 6, 7, 8 deep on the Big Ten standings, they would absolutely be in the mix. So I'll roll the dice, given that Oregon has to replace a lot of pieces, and there's a few other teams that also have to replace a lot of pieces. So I'll roll the dice and say it's a new champion in the Big Ten. I'll roll the dice in the Big 12. I look at Arizona State's schedule, and I think their schedule this year is more difficult than it was a year ago. I love their quarterback. I love their top wide receiver. I think they have some really good pieces on defense that you're going to have to lean on. But at this point, I can't tell you for certain because the Big 12 is wide open every year, as any league in the sport, including the NFL. I think the NFL has less parity than the Big 12 because any given week, it doesn't matter what week it is, the top team can lose to the team that's 10th in the league. We saw it last year. We saw teams like Kansas that had great high preseason expectations come up short by just a score or less in some games. And all of a sudden you look at the end of the year and their schedule and their resume is really not that good, but were they that bad? Probably better than their final record would indicate. I already referenced TCU, a team that I think is much better than their record indicated from a year ago. I look at Kansas State. There were some peaks and there were some valleys last year, but for the most part, every year you can kind of bank on Chris Kleiman's team winning 8 or 9 games. And if you win 8 or 9, you're going to be in the mix in the Big 12. I look at BYU, some of the pieces that are back there, how good they're going to be on the defensive side of the football. I look at the contributions that Texas Tech has made onto their roster by way of the portal. So I think the Big 12's wide open. So if you told me right now, gun to head, do you take Arizona State? No, I'd take the field. And I think that's an appropriate way of assessing where the Big 12 might be this year. I look at the SEC. Last year, Georgia won it. I think Georgia is absolutely one of the 4 front runners in the league this year. But I think Texas, I think Alabama, I think LSU are all going to have a real argument to be made at season's end as far as being one of the top teams in the league. I think Texas, if Arch Manning is who we think he is, if the offensive line can adequately replace a couple pieces up front, if the wide receivers are as good as I think they're going to be, and the defense has star power all throughout, they're going to be right there. Alabama is a team that I think is being slept on a little bit. If they can figure out the quarterback situation, assuming Ty Simpson's the guy, the wide receivers should be better, should be deeper, should be more versatile. The offensive line has a couple question marks, but I do think that group's got a chance to be pretty good by the time the season rolls around. And then defensively, look at the last 5 or 6 games of the year last year, they were playing really good football on that side of the ball. And then finally, the wild card is LSU. They might have the top quarterback in the league. I think they've made great additions in the portal, both on offense and on defense. Their weaponry at wide receiver is better than it was a year ago. And then defensively, it's year 2 in Blake Baker's system. So I think with their schedule too, yes, they have to go to Tuscaloosa and there's some tough road games, but they get a lot of tough ones in their own backyard as well. And they'll get a non-conference game against Clemson to kind of see where they're at in week 1. So I think if I had to take right now Georgia at the field, I'd take the field in the SEC. And then finally in the ACC, Clemson won it last year. This is probably the one I feel best about. Amongst the returning champions from a year ago, I think Clemson is the most likely. I look at the team that they beat in the ACC title game in SMU. I think they come back just a little bit because of some of the turnover that they experience at running back and along the defensive line. I look at Miami. I think Carson Beck's going to have a really nice year. I just don't know if he's going to be quite as good as what Cam Ward was last year en route to becoming the number 1 overall pick. And then the wild card in the ACC is Louisville. a team that's kind of being slept on, but they did a really good job in the portal. I love the addition of Miller Moss at quarterback, and I think Jeff Brom, pound for pound from a coaching standpoint, is as good as just about anybody in the entire sport. So right now, the one league champion that returns from last year that I feel best about is probably Clemson in the ACC.
All right, let's go back to the SEC for a second. Like it, love it, or not so fast, my friend, that Auburn will have their first winning season since 2020.
I love it. I look, and I thought last year they were going to have this winning season, so I've been burned before. But I look at where they've immediately upgraded their roster. Let's start at quarterback. I thought Peyton Thorne was a little underrated last year, but at the end of the day, a little too mistake prone. A few too many chances with the football. A couple of those interceptions led to losses. I mean, flat out, there's no denying it. If he doesn't turn the ball over against Cal, if the turnovers don't happen against Oklahoma, if they don't start the backup against Arkansas, I think it's a very different season for the Auburn Tigers. So I think they've upgraded a quarterback with Jackson Arnold. I think they'll run the football with the quarterback, and I think the offensive line collectively should be pretty good. I love the personnel additions that they made at wide receiver. I think you look at Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech. He's one of the best receivers in the country, and now he's going to be the number one wide receiver to take some of the load off the talented freshman Cam Coleman and some of the other great pieces that they also have at the wide receiver spot. And then defensively, I think at all three levels, they're going to be rock solid. They might have some star power along the defensive line, and there are a few guys that need to be replaced that were really, really good college football players. But all in all, I think Auburn's defense probably won't miss a massive beat from where they were a year ago. And you take into account the schedule. This is one of those odd years where they get both Georgia and Alabama at home. And anytime you're in Jordan-Hare, you know it's a tough place to go play, a tough place to go get a win. And if they can get hot early and beat Baylor in the non-conference and carry over some of that momentum in the first month of the season, we've been looking at an Auburn team that's 4-0, 5-0, 5-1 or so before Georgia comes to town. So yes, I think Auburn absolutely will have a winning season this year, and I'd be surprised if it's not 8 or 9 wins.
All right, last one here, coming off of the most disappointing season in college football memory. Like it, love it, or not so fast, my friend, that Florida State will bounce back and be in the hunt for an ACC championship and possible CFP berth.
I like it. I really like the first five words of the question. Florida State will bounce back. I absolutely believe they'll bounce back. But it's the next part of the question that I struggle with just a little bit. Right now, I still think there's a gap that exists between what Clemson has coming back and the known commodities and what Florida State has coming back and the known commodities. Now, I think they've done a really good job addressing some of the concerns, particularly quarterback. I love that they went out and hired Gus Malzahn. I love that he went out and identified Thomas Castellanos as their quarterback. He's got great mobility. He's extremely athletic. And if you look at Gus Malzahn's offense in the past, when he's got a dynamic runner at quarterback, his offense is extremely difficult to defend. And then you couple that with the play calling ability and the game planning ability of Mike Norvell. He's not going to call the plays, but he will assist in the game plan. I think that marriage and that combination between coordinator, head coach, and quarterback, that trio is very, very solid starting point. I can't imagine the offensive line being worse as well. I would expect that group to bounce back in a big way. I think they've done a really good job of addressing some question marks in the portal. You go out and get Squirrel White from Tennessee. You go out and get Deuce Robinson, who's got length, who's got versatility out on the perimeter at wide receiver from USC. So I think they're better at wide receiver than they were a year ago. I'm not even sure it's close, if I'm going to be completely honest. Now look at the defense too. I think Tony White coming over from Nebraska, that's a really solid addition. He did a great job the last couple of years in Lincoln. I would anticipate him doing a great job again this year. And you look at Florida State, were they as good as the 13-0 record would indicate in 2023? Probably not, right? There were a few games in which they were on the right side of the ball bouncing their way. And then if you look at last year, they were 2-10. Were they as bad as that 2-10 record would indicate? No. They were kind of on the wrong side of a few bad bounces, and as a result, momentum kind of gets away from you, and the season spirals out of control. So I look at Florida State, and I would be surprised. Granted, yes, it's a tough opener against Alabama. Yes, I think their schedule in the ACC is tough. You got to play at Clemson. You got to play at NC State. You got to play a home game against Miami. I think that there are some challenges for sure. but I would be surprised if this team isn't bowl eligible again. I would be really surprised if they don't get to at least 6, maybe 7 wins at the bare minimum, because Mike Norvell's too good a coach, and this is a program that has too much talent. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to encourage all of you guys to download the podcast. Go and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get the podcast. If you subscribe, it will automatically download. It'll be in your inbox every single time we put out a new episode. And while you're there, go ahead and leave us a rating. Go ahead and leave us a review. Whatever you feel comfortable with. We just appreciate the word of mouth and the growth that this show has experienced organically with the support that you guys have shown us here over the last few years. So for all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.